Okay, so I want to just get started with Lens Protocol, which is your new sort of focus after Aave, which is the largest lending protocol in crypto, and building this, what was previously thought as non-venture backable, essentially social media on the blockchain, as well as your visions for it. So let's get started. I'd love to know about how you came up with the idea of Lens, sort of when you came up with the idea relative to Aave.
Yeah, I mean, just going even back that, and in time, and it's actually quite good to be here. Just going 7 years back, I was getting super excited about the blockchain technology, and started to read more about it, and became more active in the Ethereum subreddit. And this was before like crypto Twitter pretty much existed. And in the later years of my studies, I decided that there's something in blockchain that actually provides very valuable but also interesting use cases. I think it was my last year of studies, and I wanted to finish my thesis. I was studying in the University of Helsinki in Finland, and just started to experiment with what you can actually build. And I personally was grown over the internet, like most of you all here. And internet was very interesting because it provided this enormous access to information. And just to explain what it means is that before the internet, if you wanted to get knowledge or understand something, you would have to ask your parents, go to a library. You have to walk to a library, just start with, your friends, or learn in school, for example, and a bunch of other places. And internet provides this ability to actually get any information about anything pretty much on demand. And that accessibility was super exciting because also I was at the time, even earlier, I think when I was 16, 18, 19 years old, I was building different kinds of applications online, websites, and something that's very popular is that a lot of businesses went to online. So you had this kind of like a financial layer as well. So you didn't have only internet where you could seek for information. You had an internet where you could create information and create articles and connect with people, and have this kind of like a very massive social component there, and financial component as well. So you started to see the PayPals and Stripes that actually made sense to have global economy online. And I think what the main thing for me was that there's this enormous access that was available to me. And why I find blockchain fascinating is that it actually provides access, but it just extends it in a more meaningful way, because when we think about, for example, the Aave protocol that we built first, it's basically giving access to finance globally. So it's about democratizing finance, and what blockchain and smart contracts do pretty well, they don't really look at your backgrounds, who you are, but they actually provide the exact same execution for every single person in the planet. And that is very democratic technology that basically got me excited on that. And with Lens, that's an interesting another problem to solve, because we create a lot of interesting financial technology on the blockchain, decentralized finance, which works pretty well today. But we still kind of like make a lot of connections online, and many of these platforms are owning our identities. And Lens is more about how we can actually make this balance a bit more equitable, where users are owning their own online identities, and the connections they create, and effectively providing that ownership over social networks that we contribute all the time. So that's where the whole concept of Lens was started.
Yeah, Lens, I've personally had an opportunity to hack on Lens as well, and it's been really interesting how you can integrate the social layer without any permissions, much like Twitter APIs in the old days, and you can build it into any platform, maybe ones that you couldn't conceive of. So in a hackathon, I managed to combine Trustpilot with Lens, and that was really interesting in that cohesion. I'm really to hear, having made Aave, if anything that you did in Aave translated to the development of Lens, both from an operational level, but also just the way you think about the problem. I think maybe a good contrast to that is Elon Musk with Twitter. He's obviously a phenomenal engineer, but solving Twitter is a very different problem to building electric cars. And so I'm just wondering if you felt what aspects of Aave translated into Lens?
Yeah, it's quite commonly that people ask why we're building finance and social at the same time, but they are two exciting problems to solve. But also what we're trying to do is that we kind of see businesses today over the internet. We see that internet is pretty much owned by the businesses, big businesses. So we're talking about big tech, the Googles of the world, and Facebooks, and Stripes, and other payment processors. So if you look at the internet today and think about and ask a question for yourself, is that who owns the internet? You quickly realize that the actual user, really based on the activity and usage, doesn't have a stake in that environment. And this is an environment that we're relying on a daily basis. We spend more time online than we spend in real life. At least I do. So what we are trying to do in our company is that we don't see that everything necessarily needs to be decentralized. We just want to make the internet more equitable. That means that the users, they have a say and they have a stake and ownership of the protocols we create. And we have decentralized organizations that are governed by these users, that are governing, I would say, infrastructure in the web that is very valuable and shouldn't be governed by centralized entities or by the few. And important infrastructure can be finance. Decentralized finance is very important. And obviously the social networks we create. And I think businesses still will have a meaningful role over online, but the kind of future web will be more democratic because of the user participation, the vested interest, and the ownership, and the DAOs that allow to control and manage the infrastructure and create communities. And from our perspective, what we did with Aave very well is that we're able to create something very useful for the users that are using decentralized finance, and build it in a way where it's actually public good. So when you look how the Aave protocol works, it's governed by the community. And that means that our team, for example, can't come and make changes directly to the protocol. There's a formal governance process that works, which is great. It means also that anyone who is interested in the Aave protocol, they can actually come and contribute and make meaningful proposals and changes of this infrastructure. And in sort of way, we call it public good, meaning that because everyone has the ability to contribute and it serves everyone without looking at the backgrounds, it's basically like a public park that anyone can actually use. And that's how kind of we see infrastructure should be online. And using that same playbook, we're applying a bit on the Lens ecosystem. So, it starts by building a protocol that we think might be useful, and adding features that we see that is happening on online networking. And then if that protocol becomes actually used by users and it creates opportunities, social, economical, then we start to think like how actually we can transfer the or progress into something where the community is governing a protocol. So there's definitely different kinds of things we learned from the while we were building Aave protocol. And one last important thing is that we noticed that reliability is quite important. So I think the reason people are using and kind of like trusting the Aave protocol is because it has this high sense of reliability that comes from the previous work that we have done, the existing protocol, and the existing work that we are continuously doing and what the community is doing. So I think that's very valuable that we have been able to build a very safe, functional, reliable protocol that serves as a public good.
Thank you so much. I think the most, maybe zooming out a little bit, I think the most interesting thing about Lens is sort of the extent to which it makes it equitable for creators, particularly like content creators, where, in traditional social media, you would only make, you'd push out the content, but the monetization goes to the platform owners. But, in Lens, you sort of try and reverse the script on this. What are some really exciting, specific use cases that you're really excited about with the Lens protocol? And, how does it work and how would it affect their life, our lives, from students to creators to maybe academics or builders?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating thing about Lens is that it has as a basic, it has social networking components. So you can create a profile that is secured by the blockchain. You can follow other profiles and make connections. The same way as you make connections in your campus or online, the way you have used to. But also you can create and amplify content. And also that content can actually be collected as NFTs. So it's an interesting experiment that we added into the protocol. And we all know that for the past couple of years, NFTs has been a key part of the creator onboarding into the Web3 ecosystem. So with art, photography, more recently music NFTs, but you can actually extend this into any user-generated content. And all the content that you create, you can choose to have data availability. So something that we never ask ourselves is that all the creative works we do, so all the papers we publish, all the articles we create online, what happens if the platforms we're using, they go out of business tomorrow? And that could basically be loss of very interesting science, research, but also through that kind of like a idea also loss of culture, because most of the culture we create today, we create it online and it's hosted in databases. And that's a valuable kind of like a point there. But for example, because you have this concept of NFTs, as a user you can set different kinds of parameters, like your content can be collectible by the people that are benefiting from your content, and that creates direct monetization streams to the users. So one big benefit about using partially in the protocol, well, actually significantly the blockchain technology, is that you basically have a direct monetization layer. So you can choose to monetize, but you can also choose who you want to share that monetization. And because you have the ownership of your profile and the audience, the follow graph that you might have. It gives more say and choice for the users how they monetize and which of the applications and algorithms they want to use to get reach for their content. So in a very simple way, if you write an interesting article that is helpful, you can set it as a collectible. Someone can actually collect it, and there's monetization. And as of today, I mean, Lens Protocol has been in beta on mainnet, so it's been existing a bit over than a year now, and there's over $1 million worth of value that actually has been generated through the collections of the NFTs. And the reason we added it in the first place is that we don't think it really replaces the advertisements or ad revenue, but it creates just a new design space to rethink how we create monetization streams, not for the platforms, but everyone who contributes to that content creation process.
Yeah, I think the business model is a really fascinating point because, you know, a lot of the traditional social media platforms, they've been built by maximizing your attention, maximizing your addiction towards your phone and social media and driving ad revenue. But, you know, Lens Protocol has a different business model. And I think a lot of social medias are now sort of catching on to this different monetization scheme, whether it be Twitter Blue with paid verification, both with, you know, protections against generative AI. Instagram is doing that as well. Can you just talk a bit more about the monetization model and how it avoids some of the traps of the conventional social media?
I think a lot of the monetization in social media today is quite widely related to the ad business model. And it has like interesting consequences because if you're paid by the amount of engagement you get from the users, you're going to build applications where you want to get the users, you know, to use the application as much as possible, because the more they are engaged, the more you're paid for the ads. And this creates kind of like a challenge because maybe you actually want to build something where a user comes once a week to use your application, but it provides high value, and you want to have some sort of alternative way to monetize that traffic or engagement. And I think that's the kind of like a biggest challenge of that example is that not just the users, but the developers that are building social media applications, they have to rely on the same kind of like a model. And with allowing kind of like a more open networking. So if you think about Lens Protocol, all the data is available for computation. So any one of you can actually build an algorithm that finds more interesting, valuable content for the users, or basically finds interesting content that users might be excited about to collect. You know, but also it creates transparency. So let's say if you're relying on that advertising revenue model by using something like blockchain and that transparency and smart contracts, you can actually add transparency, so you actually see who are paying the creators and how the revenues are shared, for example. And I think having this open model, open computation, and you actually could also share the benefit across everyone who contributes to that content creation supply chain. So for example, if a content is created from one Lens application, like one Lens client, let's say Orb, and it's shared from another client, let's say Lenster, and someone collects the content on Butterfly, which is another Lens application, all those clients and all the algorithms associated and all the people who were associating creating that content can actually benefit from it by sharing the revenue. And it's quite fascinating because it really means that you as a creator, a user, or curator or a developer, you're actually benefiting from that monetization as well. And everything is transparent, so we can see how the actual funds are flowing. And I kind of come from a DeFi background, so I think like the financial aspect is quite valuable, but I do think it's secondary when it comes to building sticky social networks where people come for engagement. But I do think there's a lot of value where the users are getting the benefit of participating, contributing to these networks. And I think it's that open design space that creates these new opportunities and interesting monetization models.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think we have time for one question. Yep.
Yeah. We can take one Aave and one Lens.
So what do you think of my position on Aave?
Well, it's an interesting question because if you think about the Aave protocol and kind of like the lifetime, just to give some like context, so I think when we were building the version 1 of the Aave protocol, we were expecting to maybe hold roughly maybe 30 million worth of value in the protocol itself, secured by the smart contracts, and ended up being 400 million. And with the version 2, where this protocol, this position actually is, we expected to maybe have 400 million worth of value there based on how DeFi was growing a couple of years ago. And eventually it had, I think, peak over 20 billion worth of value locked in the protocol. So during the time when we were building the version 3, we were thinking that how we can actually build something that is very much focusing on, obviously, the aspect of capital efficiency, but also risk mitigation, so having granular risk control. So we built a version where we added a lot of different kinds of features, siloed borrowing, isolation mode. So, for example, if you borrow against collateral, it can be in isolation, so it doesn't affect the other parts of the collateral, supply caps, borrowing caps, and a bunch of other kind of like features towards risk mitigation. So it's been kind of interesting to see that, and this relates to like not just to the Aave v2 of the protocol, but in general risk management, where in a lot of cases the risk actually and the markets, they move quite dynamically in cycles. So whenever you think about risk parameters, and these are set by the Aave community, as we all know, you kind of like have to plan all the way towards the next part of the cycle. So I think the Aave v2 is a market that is being built on the previous cycle, that kind of like those risk parameters are tested in the end of the cycle and how it affects. And I think in the version 3, that kind of risk can be mitigated, and it already exists, so it's mitigated in that sense. But down the line, I think it just creates kind of an interesting considerations for not just the Aave community, but other communities, how to manage risk with assets that, for example, lose liquidity down the line. So it's more, my kind of like a point is more like what we can learn from that position, as it's not posing imminent risk. But for example, when we think about for the future, when we're building these protocols or setting risk parameters, how we can actually set them correctly. And there isn't like a really correct way to set it, because it's all about so-called risk budget. So how much a community is willing to take a risk based on the reward you're getting, and how to make that kind of like equitable. And that's the kind of interesting part of how to set those parameters.
Amazing. We're out of time now, but please give a round of applause to Stani.